Jimmy is about to become a teacher at an all-girls high school. The homeroom teacher, Hiragi, asks him if he's ready to face what awaits behind this door. Jimmy nods with the confidence of a true educator. When the other teachers learn there's a new hire, a female teacher named Tenjuku expresses her surprise. The entire room feels sorry for him. Jimmy has been assigned to a class of monsters, students who have driven every previous homeroom teacher to quit. They hope he'll last at least 1 week. And they start placing bets on how long Jimmy can endure. Jimmy finally gets everyone's attention and introduces himself as the school's newest teacher. When they find out he just graduated from college, they wish him all the best. Because it seems there's no point in betting anymore, Tenjuku tries to offer some words of encouragement. But Jimmy heads straight to his classroom, even though there are still 10 minutes until the morning assembly. He has absolutely no idea what he's about to face. Jimmy is assigned as the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, nicknamed the Class from Hell. This all-girls school, while appearing like a garden full of flowers, is actually surrounded by thorny roses. Jimmy walks right up to the door of Class 1A. He glances at his watch and waits for the first bell to ring. Inside, the girls are buzzing about the new homeroom teacher. They wonder how many teachers that makes now, but in the end, it doesn't really matter, because he's just gonna quit anyway. Jimmy quietly enters the classroom and writes his name on the board. He introduces himself as their new homeroom teacher. None of the students even notice when he entered. His appearance and demeanor are so plain that it feels like they're being taught by a tasteless cracker. Even his name, Jimmy, makes them think of the word plain. Given his unremarkable appearance, the whole class completely dismisses him. And Jimmy struggles to control the chaos in the classroom. Suddenly, a girl named Momo stands up, telling her classmates to be quiet, but not without calling Jimmy Mr. Plain. Then, Momo suddenly asks Jimmy if he's ever done it with a girl. The entire class bursts into mocking laughter. Given Jimmy's appearance and behavior, they're certain he has zero experience with romance. He gives off the vibe of a lonely bookworm who's never had a girlfriend. Jimmy adjusts his glasses and calmly replies that yes, he will be single his entire life, and he will be a teacher his entire life. Jimmy's blunt response causes the class to start murmuring. He turns and asks Momo if she has any other questions. Momo, impressed that he remembered her name, isn't surprised at all. After all, she is the Momo, a super famous model working for the hit fashion magazine Heaven Teen. Because of this, Momo is disgusted to be dealing with a weirdo teacher like Jimmy. She takes the class notebook and throws it right in the trash can and encouraged him to quit. When Jimmy returned to the teacher's room, there was a board eraser on his head. Worried about his condition, Tenjuku quickly deduced that Momo was the culprit behind the bullying. She explained that Momo was originally a child actress, and through her modeling work, she developed a huge ego. Momo was always used to being spoiled, so when she gets angry, she's very difficult to deal with. There was once a teacher who tried to discipline her strictly, but Momo threatened to accuse him of pushing her down. As a result, the school was forced to fire that teacher. It didn't stop there. Momo quickly made teachers quit one after another, week after week. To comfort him, Tenjuku invited Jimmy out for a few drinks to forget about the recent trouble. But Jimmy refused, asserting that he was a true teacher, and a teacher's job is to educate. He had little sympathy for anything not related to teaching. Jimmy thanked her for the handkerchief and left for his next class. When he returned to Class 1A, he was to teach physics. He wasn't just teaching math, but was also in charge of physics. In fact, Jimmy held teaching licenses for many different subjects, which meant he would be responsible for teaching multiple subjects to Class 1A. Momo immediately asked if that meant the entire class's grades would depend solely on his evaluation. Jimmy assured them he would be a fair and just teacher. He advised the whole class to study seriously if they didn't want to repeat a year. Jimmy turned his back to start the lesson, but Momo came up from behind and sprayed apple juice on him, pretending her hand had slipped. Momo hoped this act would make Jimmy angry and cause him to lose control. However, Jimmy remained as calm as if nothing had happened. He didn't mind being wet, but sternly told Momo to see him in the guidance office after class. He reminded her that eating and drinking in class were not allowed. Momo was surprised by his reaction, and the situation worsened when the whole class laughed at her for getting detention. The judgment of the court of public opinion is cruel indeed. Momo had to stay after class, frustrated that none of her tricks could make Jimmy lose his cool. While in the guidance office, Momo received a call from her manager, who informed her that the TV show she was scheduled to appear on had been canceled. Momo quietly accepted this news, but as soon as she hung up, she angrily threw her phone to the ground. But Momo had no intention of stopping, not at all. When Jimmy entered the guidance office, he realized Momo was planning something. Jimmy asked why she wasn't in her uniform, and Momo explained that since he didn't react to anything, it was time for her to pull out all the stops. She threatened that if she screamed that she was being assaulted right now, people would quickly side with her, a popular female student, over a bland male teacher. Jimmy immediately understood what she was trying to do: force him to give up and resign. Jimmy's patience had reached its limit. If she wanted to play dirty, so would he. Suddenly, Jimmy took off his shirt. Momo reflexively covered her eyes. But Jimmy immediately turned around. He opened the door and screamed that he was being assaulted. Momo angrily grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know what the hell he was doing. Not long after, Tenjuku and a few other teachers arrived. Momo played the innocent victim. But since Jimmy was the one who had screamed for help first, the teachers were in a difficult position. However, the teachers couldn't help but side with Momo. They warned Jimmy that this could lead to his resignation. Jimmy knew that all too well. He knew the incident would turn into a harassment allegation, and even if he denied it, his fingerprints would be taken. Investigators would undoubtedly find his prints on Momo's zipper and clothes. Jimmy asked her if she was really prepared to go that far, but he also pointed out that her fingerprints were surely on his collar as well. Momo realized her plan had crumbled, and she was humiliated. Momo angrily lunged at Jimmy, forcing the teachers to intervene. Momo indignantly asked Jimmy what right he had to speak to her like that. He retorted that the teachers she had forced to resign before probably felt the same way he did now. Tenjuku noticed Jimmy was bleeding, but he just shrugged and said it was part of the job. However, the situation had now become more serious because of his injury. Momo was now facing not just suspension, but also the risk of a criminal record for assault. She fell to her knees, begging Jimmy for forgiveness. He was willing to do so on one condition. From now on, she had to live an honest, fulfilling, and meaningful life as a student. Tenjuku and the other teachers were stunned by Jimmy's gentle request, which was the complete opposite of what they had expected. Momo asked why he was letting her off so easily. He replied that the goal of education is to nurture, and he had succeeded in making her realize what she did was wrong, even if it was the threat of criminal prosecution that forced her to apologize. Momo was moved by his kindness and forgiveness. This was her complete and utter defeat. Momo started crying, confessing that she had wanted to quit the entertainment industry for a long time. She admitted she was just a second-rate model, and the TV show she was on kept getting canceled. She apologized for taking her anger out on Jimmy. Jimmy cut her off, announcing he was leaving since class had ended a long time ago. Tenjuku suggested he should stay to deal with Momo, but he replied that it wasn't in his job description. Whether or not she quit the entertainment industry was entirely Momo's business. He wasn't her father or her manager. Jimmy adjusted his glasses, reminding everyone that he would be single for life and a teacher for life. Then he quickly left, bidding farewell to Tenjuku, Amari, and Akashi. Momo wiped her tears, and she said that Jimmy was so annoying. However, Akashi realized he had never introduced himself to Jimmy, making him wonder how Jimmy knew everyone's names. The fact that Jimmy held multiple teaching licenses only added to his mystery. Even so, Jimmy's work wasn't over. 4 students were gossiping about Momo's sudden change and how they could no longer rely on her. They drew a large picture on the blackboard, declaring that Momo, while wearing nothing, had confessed her love to Jimmy and was rejected. Welcome to Class 1A. The next day, As the teacher's lounge began to buzz with talk about the incident between Jimmy and Momo, suddenly, Tenjuku walked into the room, and she requested that Jimmy come to Class 1A immediately. There was an incident. As Jimmy made his way to the classroom, Tenjuku explained why these problem students had never been dealt with. Their families have strong political ties and many important connections. These girls could even be considered the chosen ones. Those 4 students were Tsubaki, the daughter of a politician; Erika, the daughter and heiress of the prestigious Tsutsuji family; Nizasa, the champion and ace of the school's volleyball team; Maki, a talented and brilliant artist. On the outside, they seemed to be perfect students, and anyone not in Class 1A was completely unaware of their true nature. Meanwhile, in the classroom, when Momo saw the drawing on the blackboard, she angrily demanded to know who did it. An unnamed student nonchalantly said it had been there since the morning. Momo quickly realized who the culprits were, and she hurriedly ran out of the classroom. She then bumped right into the 4 girls. They immediately ignored Momo. She confronted Tsubaki about the drawing, wondering why they would do such a thing. Momo had thought the 4 of them were her friends. Tsubaki leaned down and called her a fool for thinking they were still friends. Tsubaki announced to the class that Momo had tried to seduce Jimmy, and Maki spoke up to confirm the story. The entire class chillingly turned against Momo. This was the final nail in the coffin. Tsubaki demanded that Momo never speak to her again. Tenjuku and Jimmy finally arrived. Tenjuku immediately erased the offensive drawing from the board and demanded that someone take responsibility. She also asked Jimmy to speak up, but he just told her she should leave because class was about to start. Tenjuku was sent out of the classroom in disbelief, wondering if this was her fault. When the first period began, Momo discovered someone had written "Go die" in her textbook. After class, Momo angrily threw the book at Jimmy, blaming him for her situation. She showed him an article on her phone detailing her assault case. Momo had completely lost hope. She knew that as soon as her manager found out about this, her career would be over. Jimmy asked Momo if she was okay, but she started to get restless and anxious. Jimmy promised to order her a new textbook right away. Although she didn't want to admit it, Momo realized that Jimmy did occasionally show genuine kindness and concern. When Momo asked Jimmy what she should do about her modeling career, he unexpectedly turned away and replied that it wasn't his problem. He stressed that a teacher's job isn't to solve students' career problems, but only to ensure she has a comfortable school life. Momo angrily followed Jimmy, threatening that if she lost her job, he would lose his too. A few female students witnessed Momo chasing after Jimmy and lamented that she was ruining her career over someone who looked so plain. In their eyes, Momo had hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, the 4 girls went to the nurse's office. They visited a female student with bloody bandages. Afterward, Maki asked Tsubaki why she came to the nurse's office. Tsubaki decided to tell a story. Once, there was a new teacher who was passionate about teaching. Before long, he had to deal with 2 problem students, a cute but rebellious girl and an introverted girl who often skipped class. While the rebellious girl bullied the teacher, the introverted girl was kind and understood him. They developed a romantic relationship with each other, but eventually, the rebellious girl's schemes succeeded. The teacher was forced to resign, and the introverted girl resented the rebellious girl forever. The one who should have left was the rebellious girl, not the teacher. Right after the teacher left the school, he was quickly admitted to a psychiatric hospital due to severe psychological trauma. The others doubted that Momo's bullying could cause that much damage, but Tsubaki revealed that the one who actually caused it wasn't Momo. It was the girl in the nurse's office named Banri who did it. Meanwhile, Momo continued to endure relentless bullying from her classmates. Her shoes were scuffed, her socks were soaked, and all her school materials were torn to shreds. When she happened to run into Jimmy, he just told her to hurry to class because the morning assembly was about to start. Suddenly, they heard someone fall down the stairs. Tenjuku immediately panicked, but Jimmy calmly asked her to call an ambulance. He realized the person who fell was Banri from Class 1A. Jimmy decided to go with her to the hospital to make sure she was safe. Tenjuku was surprised that Jimmy knew Banri's name. Banri had a reputation as the lazy girl, who often skipped class by staying in the nurse's office. Even her own classmates didn't remember her name. But to Jimmy, knowing a student's name was a given. He was a teacher. Jimmy got into the ambulance and they quickly drove off. After a health checkup, Jimmy visited Banri to make sure she was okay. Banri suddenly got up, hugged Jimmy tightly, and thanked him. She explained that her poor health made it almost impossible for her to attend class regularly. As a result, even her classmates didn't know her name, so she was very happy that Jimmy remembered it. Banri begged him not to abandon her like the previous teachers had. She placed all her hopes in him. Meanwhile, Momo continued to endure even worse bullying. Vicious messages were scrawled on her desk. Her lunch was thrown in the trash, and almost all of her textbooks were destroyed. During English class, the teacher scolded Momo for not bringing her materials, causing her to angrily call the teacher an old hag. Afterward, Momo stormed off to the locker room to get ready for PE class, even though she still hadn't eaten anything. When she discovered her gym uniform had been torn to shreds, she couldn't take it anymore. She screamed at her classmates, begging them to leave her alone, but they didn't. Maki and Nizasa poured juice on her hair. And then the whole group laughed at her. Knowing that Momo had no other clothes to change into, Momo couldn't believe they would bully her to this extent. But then she remembered that she had done the same thing to Jimmy before. And now she was getting a taste of her own medicine. Looking in her locker, she found a note with the word ugly on it. Jimmy approached the locker room just as Momo was lashing out. She accidentally bumped into him. Two teachers, Akashi and Sakade, witnessed the whole thing. Momo swore that it wasn't what it looked like. And she tried to frame Jimmy as her attacker, demanding he be fired. But no one believed her. Momo's accusation might have been more convincing if she'd bothered to get off of Jimmy sooner. When Momo finally got up, Jimmy offered her a clean set of clothes to change into, along with a new pair of shoes and some notebooks to replace the ones that were ruined. Momo asked why he would do so much to help her. Jimmy simply replied that it was because he was her teacher. Banri witnessed this entire touching scene, but her gaze was anything but warm. Banri stepped in front of Jimmy and suddenly pulled a knife. The entire hallway erupted in fear and chaos. Only Jimmy was calm enough to walk straight toward Banri. Banri was recovering in a private hospital. She had been alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated with kindness. Her classmates ignored her, and her parents didn't care. The only one who didn't was the teacher she adored. Hiragi reprimanded Jimmy for handling the situation himself instead of waiting for the authorities. If things hadn't gone well, the situation could have gotten messy fast. However, she also credited Akashi and Sakaide, but they both spoke up in Jimmy's defense. They recounted how Jimmy calmly approached Banri, taking the knife from her before she could harm anyone else. In the worst-case scenario, she might have stabbed herself. The group started discussing other times Banri had caused trouble for other teachers. But Jimmy suddenly declared that it was all an act on Banri's part, that even her fall down the stairs was staged. Everyone was ready to cancel Jimmy for the insensitive remark, but he insisted it was obvious if you saw Banri for who she really was. And he could do that because he was her teacher. Jimmy then asked to be excused, noting that his work hours were over. He was only paid for 8 hours, so he would only work for 8 hours. Jimmy's eccentricities aside, Amari and the other teachers were relieved that Banri was hospitalized for her own safety. But with no more problems arising, everything was supposed to be fine. However, things were not fine at all. Banri escaped from her hospital room that night, and she wandered the streets looking for Jimmy. The next morning, Tenjuku stormed into the teacher's office looking for Jimmy. Akashi and Sakaide said he hadn't arrived yet. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Jimmy showed up. It was the worst possible time for him to be there. Tenjuku announced that Banri had escaped from the hospital last night and was now on the school roof. All the teachers immediately ran to the roof, blaming Jimmy as they went for saying Banri was just bluffing. Amari stayed in the schoolyard trying to talk Banri down. while Tenjuku and Momo ran straight to the roof. When Banri saw that Jimmy wasn't with them, she fell deeper into despair. She had become emotionally dependent on Jimmy and had spent the entire night looking for his house. Momo stepped forward, offering to listen to Banri's problems. Saying she had more free time now that she'd quit modeling, Banri snapped, telling her to stay back and that she didn't need Momo's apology. But Momo apologized anyway. Momo admitted that she had done a lot of things wrong. She used to think that all teachers were annoying and not worth her time. Even now, she couldn't remember Mr. Suzuki's face. However, the fact that Banri still remembered his name so clearly said it all. Suzuki must have been very important to Banri. However, Momo couldn't. Cutting your hand and threatening to jump is pretty much the same kind of harassment you've done to others. This is why you don't have any friends, Momo said. Banri screamed at Momo to shut up and stay out of things that didn't concern her. But Momo retorted that this directly involved her. She called Banri a nuisance for always getting in between her and Jimmy. To top it off, Momo even called Banri a bird brain. This was clearly not an effective way to negotiate. Banri's hand slipped from the edge of the roof, and she began to fall. Momo lunged forward to try and grab her. But just then, Jimmy arrived, right at 8 a.m. as usual. Jimmy leaped over the edge of the roof, pulled Banri towards him, and they both fell into the nearby tree branches. By managing to grab onto a branch, they luckily survived. Banri clung to Jimmy like a koala, refusing to let go. Amari sternly scolded Jimmy for doing something so reckless. However, Jimmy just asked Banri if she was hurt anywhere. Though she was still in a state of shock, Jimmy pointed out that Banri never truly intended to kill herself. He knew she was right-handed, so the cuts on her left hand were just enough to draw blood but not deep enough to cause any permanent damage. Jimmy had been watching her very closely all this time. He affirmed that as long as he was her teacher, he would never abandon her. He told Banri there was no need to do things like this, just to get his attention. Banri calmed down and smiled. Jimmy reminded her to respect his personal time after school hours, and he stressed that she should wear her uniform properly. He also reminded her that she was about to be late for class. Banri wondered where the gentle, soft-spoken teacher she once knew had gone. Meanwhile, Tenjuku couldn't help but be impressed by Jimmy's decisiveness as he charged straight to the roof to save Banri. The more she watched Jimmy work, the more curious she became. Who really was Jimmy? While taking a bath at home, Momo couldn't stop thinking about the incident with Banri. She blamed herself for not being able to do anything and felt frustrated. It was infuriating that the bland, mediocre teacher was the one who took action. This was so frustrating. The next day, Jimmy taught his classes as usual. He called Banri to the board to solve a problem, and she happily obliged. In the teacher's lounge, Sakaede, Akashi, Amari, and Tenjuku were discussing how Banri had started coming to school again. Not only that, but Momo was also attending class regularly. Even though she'd left the entertainment industry and was facing vicious attacks on social media, any normal person would have chosen to lock themselves up at home, but Momo still came to school every day. There's no doubt about it. It's thanks to Jimmy's influence that these two problem students are slowly changing. Banri has finally returned to being a normal kid. Tenjuku told the other teachers that she felt something was off about Jimmy. Just as she said, "Speak of the devil," Jimmy walked into the teacher's lounge. The teachers immediately praised him for handling the problem students in the class. Jimmy just grabbed his teaching materials and quickly left, preparing for his next class. The other three teachers felt annoyed that Jimmy was getting all the praise. As Jimmy headed back to the classroom, he ran into Tsubaki, Nazasa, Erika, and Maki coming down the stairs. Tsubaki congratulated him on his efforts and declared him a hero. She also remarked that he was completely different from their previous teachers. He was actually willing to confront and fight them. Tsubaki also acted surprised, saying she never thought Banri would be able to leave the nurse's office. Jimmy narrowed his eyes. Realizing Tsubaki knew more than she was letting on, he started laying out the facts. Banri didn't want to leave the nurse's office because she was afraid of someone, and Jimmy knew exactly why Banri hated Momo. It was because Momo had driven away the teacher Banri adored, Mr. Suzuki. When Banri saw Momo starting to get closer to the teachers, she feared she was falling into a situation similar to the one before. If Jimmy were forced to resign, Banri would be plunged into despair, and Momo would be left without any allies. Erica stepped forward and accused Jimmy of making it sound like this was Tsubaki's fault. But Jimmy calmly told her not to jump to conclusions, even if someone was pulling the strings. Banri's feelings for him were just a misunderstanding on her part. Jimmy adjusted his glasses and hoped that no further harm would come to either Momo or Banri. Suddenly, Nazasa launched a powerful kick into Jimmy's chest, sending him flying into a wall. Nazasa coldly told Jimmy to stop shoving his one-sided ideals and morals down their throats. She also said he shouldn't go around school accusing people without any proof. Jimmy remained calm, replying that he was just doing his job as a teacher. This answer only infuriated Nazasa more. She stepped on his head, demanding he provide proof that they were involved in the incidents with Momo and Banri. Tenjuku saw Jimmy getting stepped on and intervened, but Nazasa pretended that he had fallen on his own. Maki also deliberately stepped on Jimmy's glasses, but pretended it was an accident. Tsubaki and her friends giggled as they walked away, leaving Tenjuku furious on Jimmy's behalf. Strangely, Jimmy seemed completely unfazed. He was a man on a mission, and he had no intention of giving up. He got up and left the school as his work hours were over, despite Tenjuku's attempts to stop him. When Jimmy left, Tenjuku picked up a small keychain that he had dropped, with the number 66 engraved on it. Back in the teacher's lounge, Tenjuku contemplated the symbol, and she wondered what it meant or represented. Amari noticed Tenjuku was still there and checked on her. Tenjuku showed her the keychain she had just found. Amari suggested that Tenjuku try looking it up online to learn more about the keychain. She thought the symbols JA and the number 66 might be related to a school or a graduation emblem. If she could find the school's name, she could identify its owner. Tenjuku went on Google to find information about the keychain. Although she didn't usually meddle in other people's private lives, she felt that Jimmy was no ordinary teacher. After some searching, she found an article from 10 years ago about an incident that occurred at the Zhuan Private Academy. According to the article, the school once had a monster teacher who had committed unacceptable acts against students. One of the teacher's symbols was the letter J. Tenjuku convinced herself that it couldn't possibly be Jimmy. However, as she dug deeper into the case, she discovered something she shouldn't have known. Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to, she told herself. According to the information, this school once considered Class 1A to be a gathering of monsters. And if there was any teacher capable of facing these monsters, it could only be someone with an extraordinary nature like them. Jimmy was a teacher who had been feared like a murderer. Tenjuku grew worried that Jimmy might also be a monster. When Jimmy caught Tenjuku reading the article about him, he simply asked for the keychain back, saying it was very important to him. Tenjuku timidly handed the keychain back to him, and Jimmy turned away as if nothing had happened. She asked him if he was angry with her, but Jimmy just replied that he wasn't angry at all. He said he didn't care what other people found out about him. Then, Jimmy left the teacher's lounge as quickly as he had arrived, leaving Tenjuku to her thoughts. Tenjuku told herself that perhaps she had jumped to the wrong conclusion. There was no way someone could be so unconcerned about something so serious. She decided that Jimmy had nothing to do with the incident at Zhuan's school. However, outside, Jimmy took out a blood-stained handkerchief with the letters JA embroidered on it. He really was involved in the Juan incident. The next day, Jimmy asked Momo if she knew why he had called her to the counseling office. Momo started to giggle, mistakenly thinking that Jimmy wanted to continue their private session from the first time. Jimmy told Momo that she had placed last on the most recent test. Momo nearly screamed in horror. Hearing the noise, Tenjuku opened the door, walked in, and immediately saw Momo's disastrous test scores. Tenjuku understood that Onega was a difficult school, but getting single-digit scores on multiple exams was something she couldn't ignore. However, Momo didn't seem to care much. She only chose this school because she thought the uniforms were cute. Tenjuku immediately pointed out that this could seriously affect her extracurricular activities, and that her modeling career could also be in jeopardy. Hearing that, Momo's heart sank. Right now, she had no modeling contracts, no friends, and now, no decent grades. She asked Jimmy and Tenjuku if they really expected her to try even harder. Jimmy answered seriously, "That's right." He said she needed to take her studies seriously, unless she wanted to repeat the year. Back in the teacher's lounge, Tenjuku expressed her sympathy for Momo. She told Jimmy that before he arrived, Momo was actually a very promising model, just waiting for a big break to truly step into the spotlight. Tenjuku wondered if there was anything they could do to help Momo. Jimmy replied that they are teachers, and their only job is to make sure she doesn't get held back. Tenjuku sighed, glancing over at Jimmy. He seemed to be completely emotionless. In an unguarded moment, she blurted out that the rumors about him being an emotionless machine might be true. Then she quickly apologized to him. She told herself that there was no way a man who would risk his own life to save a student jumping from the school roof could possibly be heartless. Tenjuku had heard that Jimmy could actually smile and asked him why he didn't do it a little more often. With a completely straight face, Jimmy asked back, "Is smiling also part of a teacher's job?"